Ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Hey everybody, this is the Digital Asset Investor. This was an interesting article that I saw on CoinDesk this morning. Bitcoin will still bite the dust. Now, you know, in the past, when the topic of Bitcoin biting the dust came up, I guess I kind of took that as an attack on digital assets in general. That is until this whole proof of work thing began to blow up, as I discussed in prior videos this week. But now I'm seeing these articles where they're talking, well, maybe it's just that this specific article, this guy is hitting more on the point of what I'm getting at. He says Bitcoin will still bite the dust. And then he goes on to talk about how Bitcoin mining is a natural monopoly. And that kind of hit a chord. And he says, here, I'll just read. The problem is that atomistic competition and natural monopoly are inconsistent. The built-in centralized tendencies of the natural monopoly mean that mining firms will become bigger and bigger and eventually produce an actual monopoly unless the system collapses before then. So he's making the point that the proof of work, and he's using Bitcoin as the main example, but the proof of work, these miners, someone eventually can have control. And when they do, it's no longer centralized or decentralized. Then it is centralized. And that's what we've been seeing with all this proof of work, with 51% attacks on Ethereum Classic and these forks where Roger Ver and then Craig Wright, they're all arguing and they're basically telling the world, no, I can control this. No, I can control this. And threatening to destroy each other and this type of thing. And they're so caught up in, I guess, the technology of things, and they're probably too smart for their own good in some instances, because they don't realize that they are literally screaming out to the world, no, Bitcoin is not decentralized. It's very centralized because we're telling you we can control it. I'm stronger than you. I mean, they went on with that for a couple of weeks, it seemed like, and still are, I believe. But now with this 51% attack, it's all out there for the world to see. And so this guy's writing an article. He's writing an article about pointing all this out. But then we get to this, and this is where our lovely XRP comes into play. An inferior product cannot survive. There's also an argument that the price of Bitcoin must go to zero because an inferior product cannot survive long term in the absence of regulatory barriers to entry. Now, this is something that I believe that Hoder kind of touched on this morning, and I kind of touched on, and that is, I believe some of the really large Bitcoin investors, I believe that those same people are the ones who have floated out the idea XRP is a security. I believe those people planted those stories. I believe that it was intentionally put out there because I think that, and actually there was a video or an article where Chris Larson made a comment to the effect that the Bitcoin people that got to the party first, those aren't his words, these are my words, but in so many words, he said that a lot of the things that are going on from a regulatory standpoint were because a lot of these big Bitcoin holders got to the politicians and the regulators first. Again, those are not his words, but he did say something to that effect one time. And I think I think that's 100% right. But what's being said right here is also 100% right. I don't care who's involved. It's just a matter of time before an inferior product is going to be beat. I want to draw your attention to this one of these last paragraphs here. The innovators, the early movers in the market, rarely survive long-term under conditions of free entry. An example is the Ford Model T. This automobile was first produced in 1908 and soon came to dominate the market. But competitors learned from its design flaws and built better cars, which eventually stole its market share. The Ford Model T now survives only as an antique. Now, for those of you that have not heard me say it before, the guys that started what eventually became Ripple, they saw Bitcoin and intentionally decided to build a better car. That is what they did from the very beginning. And so this is all very true. And I believe that in the end it will affect Bitcoin, and you'll see XRP dominate. And then you'll see other new players that you don't even know right now. I wanted to show you this. This is from at XRP_co. He's got a website. We are pleased to list 300 plus exchanges to buy, sell, and trade XRP. In the future, he needs to copy me on this. I found it by accident, but if he'll copy me on it, I'm very likely to send people your way. If you're trying to get traffic to the website, I'm happy to do it. But this is his website, xrp.co, and they've got buy XRP. XRP is available at the following exchanges. I wanted to show you this because it's a very good visualization of how far we've come. They've got nice color graphics that show you all. When I scroll down this, you need to be thinking XRP liquidity, because liquidity is what it's all about. Liquidity is what's going to get XRP to be used by more and more banks and payment providers. So the more of these exchanges that not only come online, but also create XRP base pairs, and then begin to use XRapid, and we add more and more liquidity providers, this is all going to increase adoption. So this is a very good visualization for you to see. Moving along, I wanted to recommend a video from DM Logic. I watched this yesterday. DM Logic is called The Fix Is In, Get Your XRP Horse into the Starting Gate. And DM Logic made a very good point in this video. And those of you that don't follow him, it's at I'm the Debate on Twitter, and then his channel on YouTube is of course DM Logic, and he's one of my favorite XRP YouTubers, and he's a very grounded guy. I think he's about my age, so I kind of identify with where he's coming from. He does a lot of videos. He'll do some in his basement, in his truck, and different places. But anyway, good YouTuber and a really good guy as well. But this Fix Is In that he did, what he's talking about here is something that I've touched on as well, and that is that he believes, as I also believe, that there are a lot of powerful players from traditional Wall Street that are coming into this space, and that they are literally holding off this market until they are ready to enter this market. And they can do that very easily. I've talked about this before. It can be done very, very easily just by manipulating Bitcoin prices. There's no real regulation in place to prevent that right now. And the players are all over the world. I mean, markets can be manipulated from China and all over the place while these people get ready to come into this market. But that's all short-term things, people. And so I want to make sure you understand that point. I think Bitcoin is a short-term leader, and Bitcoin someone being able to manipulate the entire crypto market by manipulating Bitcoin is also a short-term issue. Okay, moving on. I wanted to tell you today, I told you that on the weekends, I'm going to do at least one section of Lead the Field. Lead the Field is by Earl Nightingale, and this is something my dad gave to me a long time ago. He used Lead the Field. Earl Nightingale, for those of you that don't know, he was a guy who was a motivator and into self-help before it was a thing, before it was popular, before any of these guys you see today, like Tony Robbins and these guys. This guy was really one of the founders of the whole area. I mean, but here's what I love about Earl Nightingale. This guy is very, very smart, and because he was doing it before anyone else was, this guy has a lot of conviction, and he's very common sense. And he's a guy who had started businesses and he had gone from one success to the next. And eventually he put out a tape called The Strangest Secret. And he recorded the tape for a group of salesmen that worked at his insurance company, is the way the story goes. And the salesman, he was going out of town, and he left a copy of this tape. Back then they had tapes. for his salesman, and it became such a popular thing what he said with his salesman that they told him he needed to have it produced, and he went on to get a gold record with The Strangest Secret, and then he got into the entire personal development field. Well, I'm here to tell you all, okay, especially you young people out there, lead the field. I'll make a statement that'll blow you away right now. You can give me a Harvard graduate, and then you give me someone who listens to Lead the Field more than once, and then applies everything in Lead the Field. And my money, in terms of the success of those two people, I'm putting my money on the guy who really applied the lessons in Lead the Field. And that is why I'm reading this to you guys. So today I'm going to read the section called Acres of Diamonds. I want to finish this part of the video by reading you one of my favorite quotes, and this is a quote that Earl Nightingale said. I can't remember if it was in Lead the Field or The Strangest Secret. Let this quote really sink in, folks. This is from George Bernard Shaw. People are always blaming their circumstances for what they are. I don't believe in circumstances. The people who get on in this world are the people who get up and look for the circumstances they want. And if they can't find them, make them. Thank you for listening. I'm the digital asset investor. I'm not an investment advisor. Please subscribe and hit the like button. But this is for entertainment purposes only. And don't go yet, because Earl Nightingale from Lead the Field, I'm about to do Acres of Diamonds. Thank you for listening. Acres of Diamonds. In 1843, a man was born who was to have a profound effect upon the lives of millions of people. His name was Russell Herman Conwell. He became a lawyer, then a newspaper editor, and finally a clergyman. During his church career, an incident occurred that was to change his life and the lives of countless others. On one day, a group of young people came to Dr. Conwell at his church and asked him if he would be willing to instruct them in college courses. They all wanted a college education, but lacked the money to pay for it. He told them to let him think about it and to come back in a few days. After they left, an idea began to form in Dr. Conwell's mind. He asked himself, why couldn't there be a fine college for poor but deserving young children? Before very long, the idea consumed him. Why not, indeed? It was a project worthy of 100% dedication, complete commitment. Almost single-handedly, Dr. Conwell raised several $1 million, with which he founded Temple University, today one of the country's leading schools. He raised the money by giving more than 6,000 lectures all over the country. And in each one of them, he told a story called Acres of Diamonds. It was a true story that had affected him very deeply, and it had the same effect on his audiences. The money he needed to build the college came pouring in. The story was the account of an African farmer who had heard tales about the other farmers who had made millions by discovering diamond mines. These tales so excited the farmer that he could hardly wait to sell his farm and go prospecting for diamonds himself. So he sold the farm and spent the rest of his life wandering the African continent, searching unsuccessfully for gleaming gems that brought such high prices on the markets of the world. Finally, the story goes, worn out and in a fit of despondency, he threw himself into a river and drowned. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, or farm in this case, the man who had bought the farm happened to be crossing the small stream on the property. Suddenly, there was a bright flash of blue and red light from the stream's bottom. He bent down, picked up the stone. It was a good-sized stone, and admiring it, later put it on his fireplace mantel as an interesting curiosity. Several weeks later, a visitor to his home picked up the stone, looked closely at it, hefted it in his hand, and nearly fainted. He asked the farmer if he knew what he'd found. When the farmer said no, that he'd thought it was a piece of crystal, the visitor told him he'd found one of the largest diamonds ever discovered. The farmer had trouble believing that. He told the man that his creek was full of such stones, not as large perhaps as the one on the mantel, but they were sprinkled generously throughout the creek bottom. Needless to say, the first farmer had sold so that he might find a diamond mine turned out to be the most productive diamond mine in the entire African continent. The first farmer had owned, free and clear, acres of diamonds, but he had sold them for practically nothing in order to go look for them somewhere else. Well, the moral is clear. If only the first farmer had taken the time to study and prepare himself to learn what diamonds look like in their rough state, and since he had already owned a piece of the African continent, so thoroughly explore the property he had before looking elsewhere, all of his wildest dreams would have come true. The thing about this story that so profoundly affected Dr. Cronwell and subsequently millions of others was the idea that each of us is at this moment standing in the middle of his or her own acres of diamonds. If only we will have the wisdom and the patience to intelligently and effectively explore the work in which we are now engaged, to explore ourselves, we'll usually find the riches we seek, whether they be financial or intangible or both. Before we go running off to what we think are greener pastures, let's make sure that our own is not just as green or perhaps even greener. It's been said that if the other guy's pasture appears to be greener than ours, it's quite possible that it's getting better care. Besides, while we're looking at other pastures, other people are looking at ours. To my mind, there are few things more pitiful than the person who wastes his life running from one thing to another, forever looking for the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, never staying with one thing long enough to find it. No matter what your goal may be, perhaps the road to it can be found in the very thing you're now doing. It wasn't until he was completely paralyzed by polio and forced to reach into the rich resources of his mind that a courageous farmer got the idea of producing exceptionally good meat products on his farm. From that idea, one of the country's most successful meat packaging companies was born. His farm contained acres of diamonds too. He'd just never been forced to dig for them before. Your mind is your richest resource. Let it thoroughly explore the possibilities lurking in what you're presently doing before turning to something new. I say that because there are probably good reasons for your having chosen your present work in the beginning. If there weren't, and if you're unhappy in the field you're in, then perhaps it's time for some serious exploration. Dr. Russell Conwell's life is an example of the importance of a willingness to change once one's own pasture has been thoroughly explored. As I mentioned earlier, Dr. Conwell began as a lawyer, then became a newspaper editor, before he finally found his true calling as a clergyman and the founder of a great university. One of the best examples of a person's finding acres of diamonds hiding in his work is the story of Stu Leonard of Norwalk, Connecticut. Stu Leonard began as a dairy route delivery man. As he worked his rounds, he began to think of all the products connected to the dairy business that his customers really needed. With very little down, he bought a working dairy, and with a lot of hard work, he began to build a business around it. He kept the working dairy intact and the center of his operations, and he surrounded it with windows through which his customers could watch the process, and he began to add other products to his line. Today, his dairy store is the largest in the world, and he sells everything in the food line. People come from all over the area to shop at Stu Leonard's world's largest dairy store. They love it, and he loves them. People who are too old or infirm to come to his store on their own are picked up in Stu Leonard's buses and brought to the store. He has a multi-million-dollar business that grew out of a delivery route. The diamonds were there, and Stu Leonard made the most of them. Every kind of work has such opportunity lurking within it. The opportunities are there now, clamoring to be noticed, but they cannot speak or print signs for us to read. Our part of the bargain is to look at our work with new eyes, with eyes of creation. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin said, "It's our duty as men and women to proceed as though limits to our abilities do not exist. We are collaborators in creation." A man I knew in Arizona began with a small gas station. One day he was sitting at his desk. He was watching through the window while one of the young attendants filled a customer's gas tank. He stood watching the customer while he stood about waiting for the job to be finished. It dawned upon him that that man had money in his pockets and that there were things he needed or wanted that he would pay for if they were conveniently displayed where he could see them. So he began selling other items: fishing tackle, then fishing licenses, hunting and camping equipment, rifles, shotguns, ammunition, hunting licenses. He found an excellent line of aluminum fishing boats and trailers. He began buying up the contiguous property around him. Then he added an auto parts department. He had always carried cold soft drinks and candy, but now he added an excellent line of chocolates in a refrigerated case. Before long, he sold more chocolates than anyone else in the state. He carried thousands of things his customers could buy while they waited for their cars to be serviced. All of this guaranteed that most of the gas customers in town would come to his station. He sold more gas. He began cashing checks on Fridays. The bonanza grew and grew. It all started with a man with a human brain watching a customer who was standing around with money in his pockets and nothing to spend it on. Others would have lived and died with this small service station, and they do. My friend saw the diamonds. Both my friend in Arizona and Stu Leonard in Connecticut are customer-oriented. Serve the customer. Serve the customer better than anyone else is serving the customer. Stu Leonard's company policy is conspicuously displayed in his store for all to read. And it goes like this. Rule 1, the customer is always right. Rule 2, if the customer is ever wrong, reread rule number 1. Upon seeing a wealthy customer drive in, many service station operators might say to themselves, I ought to be in his business, not so. There is just as much opportunity in one business as there is in another. If only we will stop playing copycat with each other and begin thinking creatively. Begin thinking in new directions. It's there, believe me, and it's our job to find it. Take the time to stand back and look at your work as a stranger might. A stranger might ask, why does he do it that way? Has he noticed how what he's doing might be capitalized upon or multiplied? If you're happy with things as they are, then by all means, keep them that way. But there's great fun in finding diamonds hiding in ourselves and in our work. We never get bored or blasé or find ourselves in a rut. A rut, we're reminded, is really nothing more than a grave with the ends kicked out. Some of the most interesting businesses in the world grew out of what was originally a very small idea in a very small area. If something is needed in one town, then the chances are that it's needed also in all towns and cities all over the country. You might ask yourself also, how good am I at what I am presently doing? Do you know all there is to know about your work? Would you call yourself a first-class professional at your work? How would your work stand up against the work of others in your line? The educator and author J.B. Matthews wrote, unless a person has trained himself for his chance, the chance will only make him ridiculous. A great occasion is worth to a man exactly what his preparation enables him to make of it. I'm sure Dr. Matthews intended to include the female half of the world in that statement. I'm often appalled by how little people know about the business they're in. That's not my department, they'll say. I suppose if they would see a fire starting in someone else's department, they wouldn't report it. Most real estate people don't sell homes and property, they show homes and property, something a 6-year-old child could do. They often know nothing at all about selling or marketing, yet they call themselves real estate professionals. They're actually tour guides. This is the living room, they say to intelligent men and women who already know what a living room looks like. Someone, come to think of it, I think it was I, once wrote that the human race is much like a convoy of ships in time of war. The whole fleet is slowed down to protect the slowest ships. and human beings march slowly en masse, unmindful of the diamonds beneath their feet. To become diamond miners, the first thing we need to do is break away from the crowd and quit assuming that because people in the millions are living that way, it must be the best way. It's not the best way. It's the average way. The people going the best way are way out in front. They're so far ahead of the crowd you can't even see their dust anymore. They're the people who live and work on the leading edge and the cutting edge, and they mark the way for all the rest. You and I have a choice to make, really. It takes imagination, curious imagination, to see the diamonds in their rough state as cut and polished gemstones, and to see a pile of iron ore as stainless steel. To prospect for your own acres of diamonds, develop a faculty we might call intelligent objectivity, the faculty to stand back and look at your work as a person from Mars might look at it, within the framework of what industry or profession does your job fall. Do you know all you can know about your industry or profession? Isn't it time for refreshing change of some kind? How can the customer be given a better break? Each morning, ask yourself, how can I increase my service today? There are rare and very marketable diamonds lurking all around me. Have I been looking for them? Examining every facet of my work and the industry or profession in which it has its life. There are better ways to do what I'm presently doing. What are they? How will my work be performed 20 years from now? Everything in the world is in a state of evolution. How can I do now what will eventually be done anyway? Think of what Stu Leonard did in his dairy route, and my friend in Arizona with his small service station. What Famous Amos did with his chocolate chip cookies, and what Procter & Gamble did with soap. Sure, there's risk involved. There's no growth of any kind without risk. We start running risks when we get out of bed in the morning. Risks are good for us. They bring out the best that's in us. They brighten the eye and get the mind cooking. They quicken the step and put a new shining look on our days. Human beings should never be settled. It's okay for chickens and cows and cats, but it's wrong for human beings. People start to die when they become settled. We need to keep things stirred up. Back in 1931, Lloyd C. Douglas, the world-famous novelist who wrote The Robe, Magnificent Obsession, and other best-selling books, wrote a magazine article called Escape. In that article, Douglas asked, who of us has not at some time toyed briefly with the temptation to run away? If all the people who have given that idea the temporary hospitality of their imagination were to have acted upon it, few would be living at their present addresses. And of the small minority who did carry out the impulse into effect, it's doubtful if many ever disengaged themselves as completely as they had hoped from the problems that hurled them forth. More often than otherwise, it may be surmised that they packed their troubles in their old kit bags and took them along. The point of the article was simply don't try to run away from your troubles. Overcome them. Prevail. Right where you are. What we're really after is not escape from our perplexities and frustrations, but a triumph over them. And one of the best ways to accomplish that is to get on course and stay there. Restate, reaffirm your goal. And the thing you want to do most, the place in life you most want to reach, see it clearly in your mind's eyes. Just as you can envision the airport in Los Angeles when you board your plane in New York, or like a great ship in a storm, just keep your heading and your engines running. The storm will pass, although sometimes it seems that it never will, and one bright morning you'll find yourself passing the harbor light. Then you can give a big sigh of relief, rest a while, and almost before you know it, you'll find your eyes turning seaward again. You'll think of a new harbor you'd like to visit, a new voyage upon which to embark, and once again you'll set out. That's just the way this funny-looking, two-legged, curious, imaginative, tinkering, fiddling dreamer called a human being operates. He escapes from problems not by running away from them, but by overcoming them. And as soon as he overcomes one set of problems, he starts looking around for new and more difficult pickles to get himself into and out of. So if you're finding yourself looking at travel folders and thinking of running away, go ahead, think about it. It will get your mind off things for a while. Then zero in on your goal. We'll talk more about that later in this program, and get busy. Take one thing at a time, and before you know it, you'll start seeing those diamonds scattered all over your world, and you'll be out in the clear again. If you feel like running away from it all once in a while, you're perfectly normal. If you stay and get rid of your problems by working your way through them, you're a successful citizen. Start taking an hour a day with a legal pad and pen to dissect your work. Take it apart. Look at its constituent parts. There's opportunity there. That's your acre of diamonds.